Welcome everyone. I hope you have your popcorn, your notebooks, you're ready to get started. So thank you for joining us from wherever you are on Turtle Island and beyond. There's a lot going on these days, environmentally, socially, health-wise, so thank you for tuning in with us and spending some time with us. A little bit of information on who we are. So Chloe is from Aware. Oops. Can you still hear me? Okay. We have a next slide coming up that kind of gives us a little bit of background information on who we are. AWARE stands for the Association of Whistler Area Residents for the Environment. They've been working on conservation and climate actions in Whistler and the Sea to Sky since 1989. So please do visit their website, follow them on social media. They have many amazing programs for all ages and interests, but we're very thankful that they have partnered with us on this event and on different events. Their dedication and energy for all things environmental is very inspiring and commendable. So we'd like to thank Claire and Natasha from Aware to bring this event, making it a success. So my name is Jolene Patrick. I work with the Coast Cascades Grizzly Bear Initiative. We are a nonprofit, non-government organization striving to recover threatened and critically endangered grizzly bear species populations in Southwest British Columbia. We welcome you to join, look at our website. It's being revamped, so stay tuned for more updates on initiatives and programs that we have for threatened bears in Southwest BC. We would also very much like to thank the Grizzly Bear Foundation. We had overwhelming interest for this online webinar, so it was through the Grizzly Bear Foundation that we were able to increase our capacity to let more of you join in. So thank you to the Grizzly Bear Foundation. We now have, I think we have just over 425 were registered. It is being recorded, so we can watch it at a later date. But grizzly bears are such an iconic species that, you know, in Canada and worldwide, it shows there is a greater community that are just as interested and passionate as we are. All right, so for our outline, how it's going to kind of fold out, we hopefully have your attention for 90 minutes. This kind of event came through because, you know, when we do outreach activities, people would keep asking us, you know, the same questions about grizzly bears. The importance of this species, it's ingrained, its ties to the landscape is key for the health of our shared landscapes. So grizzly bears make headlines, but there's a lot of misleading information out there. So who better to bring you those frequently asked questions than experts in the field of grizzly bear research. So with COVID, you know, restricting us in our homes, it's a great opportunity to expand our knowledge base. So thank you everybody who has submitted those questions to us. We will, as Claire said, try to cover as much as we can with a limited time. So we have organized it into categories. We have grizzly bear biology and ecology, behavior, conflict avoidance, and grizzly bear research. Please note at the end, we will include a list of resources. So if your questions haven't been answered, there's a wealth of information out there, and we're happy to provide those. And also watch for audience polls. So there will be a chance for you to participate. We'll be posting questions to you as well. Those features should be on your screen, on the bottom of your screen. And yes, so the world is changing for humans, for wildlife alike, and you know, we're joining together, we're educating ourselves and what's happening locally in the greater global community, so we can move forward collectively. So we are thankful you have joined us today, and I would like to send well wishes and healing to everybody who are on the front line, standing up for our health, for our environment, and for justice. I'd also like to welcome our panelists, who are all independent scientists. Their many accolades are too numerous to go over and extensive, but with combined decades of research, fieldwork, and contributions to the world of grizzly bear and helping us understanding and appreciate the life of grizzly bears. We're very thankful that they have joined us today to get a closer look of science and nature. So we would like to welcome Dr. Lana Charnello, who joins us from the island, Dr. Bruce McClellan from kind of north of Whistler, Dr. Michael Proctor from the Kootenays, and as well from the Kootenay region, new Dr. Michelle McClellan. So without further ado, I will pass it on to Executive Director of AWARE, Claire Ruddy, to start off our question and answer series.
Thanks, Jolene. So as Jolene mentioned, there was so many questions that we could have put into this session. So we are going to try to fly through and cover as much as we can. But we thought we'd start with a question for you, the audience. And so we're just going to, in front of you on your screen, you should see a question pop up. And we want to know how many of you have seen a grizzly bear in person, in the wild, not in captivity. So we're going to launch that poll and we'll give you 60 seconds to answer it. So you should see it in front of you. Click on the yes or no. Should have got a countdown clock. Okay, so we've still got lots of people going. 80% full. Okay, last few seconds. You snooze, you lose. Okay, we're ending it there. So 60% of people that we can share these results. So we've got on the on this session, 60% of people have seen a grizzly bear, 40% have not. So scientists, we know what we're who we're talking to on the other side of this this vacuous technological call. So which is great. So okay, so we're gonna start with a little bit of framing here. So I'm going to start with inviting Bruce to maybe give us a little bit of an update around how bears are doing. So Bruce is a now retired government researcher, and you know, has got asked this question a lot. So we'll start with that, Bruce, if you don't mind.
Do you mute? Yeah, that is the question that I've been asked more than any other over my long career with bears. It's, so Bruce, how are the bears doing? And I'll try to put it, 250, 280 years of how bears are doing into about 5 minutes. Generally, as most of us know, they did very, very, very poorly for about 270 years in Western North America. They were more or less extirpated from the lower 48 states. A couple of small populations remained in Yellowstone, northern Montana, and right along the Canadian border, a tiny one there. They were extirpated across the prairies, and in BC they were greatly reduced. They didn't get quite as hammered. The distribution in BC, largely because it's fairly inhospitable for humans, but the same people that were wiping them out in the lower 48, a lot of them moved north. I mean, in 1858, 30,000 of the gold miners from California moved to the Caribou and the Fraser to mine gold, so same type of people. When I started doing grizzly bear research in the 1970s, I spoke to lots of old timers who are long gone now, because that was a long time, 40 some odd years ago, and many of them told me stories of killing many bears in the 30s and 40s. Two guys I remember well told me they killed so many bears, they and their crews, whether they were mining crews or logging crews, that two of these guys told me they thought they were going to kill them all. And even when I started in the 70s in the Flathead Valley, a guy told me that about 8 years before I was there, they killed 5 bears in the garbage dump that was 100 feet from their logging camp, right in my study area. And when I began working there, the little logging camps had garbage dumps 100 feet from their camp. And threw garbage there. I didn't know that they shot any bears in that first little bit. We certainly shut that down really quick. So anyway, bear numbers were greatly depressed until about the mid-70s. Things started changing a lot in the late 60s and early 70s, and particularly because the U.S. Put them on their endangered species list in 1975. The mentality of people changed. They started valuing bears better. It wasn't the knee-jerk reaction to shoot every bear you saw. The population I started working on in the 70s was one that I started there because it was thought to be threatened. It was thought to be almost gone. I mean, Andy Russell, who hopefully some of you have heard about, Andy, that was Grizzly country, the Flathead Valley where he had his guiding territory. he thought we were down to 15 bears. So anyway, I started working there, and yeah, there were few bears back then. But over the first 20 years that I worked in that valley, they went up a lot. I mean, they were rebounding after being depressed. And they more or less almost tripled in the first 20 years before reaching some kind of a carrying capacity. And they've kind of gone up and down for the next 20 some odd years. I've worked there for, this will be my 43rd field season in that steady area. Further to the, I'm just going to go through the southern fringe because I can't cover the whole province. I'd be here for hours. And I don't know as much about the whole province because we've done more work along the southern fringe where we have most of our conservation challenges. A little bit, we're getting a little bit north of there in the Elk Valley. When I started in the Flathead, bears were rarely seen in the Elk Valley around Fernie, Sparwood. They were seen up in Elkford because they had a garbage dump there. They were almost never seen in the trench, the dry trench land, where I can remember when the first bears started moving into the farmlands near Elko, and people were talking about it. Now there's quite a few bears in the Elk Valley. I mean, Clayton Lamb's been working there recently, and I think he's caught 45 bears or something now, right in the Elk Valley between Fernie and Sparwood up to Elkford, not in the mountains, remote stuff, but close to all the human settlement and ski resorts and all that. And we're seeing more and more in the Rocky Mountain Trench as well. I'm going fast. So my proctors worked on, and two populations, one of the cabins and one of the I think relatively poor bear habitat, and they've done an incredible amount of work, and they've kept those populations stable or even increasing a bit, and they've done a great job of keeping them doing okay. A little bit further to the Selkirks, which is goes in the U.S. and up towards Nelson. I remember when John Almack, he was a U.S. biologist, started working in there in the very early 1980s. He had a hard time finding a bear. He trapped and caught bears, hundreds of black bears, and finally caught one. They were not that abundant, and people have monitored that population, various peoples, for a long time, and then Mike for the last 20 years or so. And the population has expanded at about 3% a year, to the point where they're now spilling out into the Creston farmlands, and Mike is doing a great job of dealing with interface bears and the population now reconnecting through efforts. So it's just quite positive. A little bit further, the Kettle Granby, we did an inventory there in the 1990s because, of course, it was thought to be doing very poorly, and it was. And another one 20 years later, it increased by about 60%. Your DNA-based mark recapture. So that population, it's not, it's again pretty marginal. It's not great bear habitat, but it's they're expanding slowly.
Bruce,
yeah.
We've got on the slide the map of BC with the population unit. So this is great because we can see where you're talking about. But can you maybe just speak to the there's the big red line through the middle block through the middle of the south where the extirpation area, and the difference between that, what does extirpation mean?
That's the dry Okanagan mostly. It's here's the it's a pretty rough line. We now have bears spilling into it quite a bit, particularly males. It's a pretty fuzzy line. When I left, the government guys are now thinking of getting rid of that whole thing, and because we do have some bears falling in. There's lots of areas there where there are not grizzly bears, and I don't think we really want grizzly bears. I mean, you got the Okanagan Valley Orchards and Vineyards, and Kelowna and Vernon, and Soyuz, and it's dry. It's not the greatest bear habitat, except for all the fruit trees, of course. But I can't see that being a management goal to recover grizzly bears into the Okanagan. I mean, that would be that would be a huge challenge. But anyway, I was going to head off across to the south. I haven't got much time, to the South Coast Mountains where and then I'll work back into there a bit maybe, because starting in 2004 we started doing work in the South Coast Mountains, and Michelle worked mostly in the southern Chilcotin and the Stein-Hattelatch. The South Chilcotin is pretty good bear habitat. Numbers are gradually increasing about 3% a year. There's areas there that have really good little bear populations. The whole area is doing quite well. The Stein-Hattelatch is one of the bad ones. It's isolated, inbred bears, very few bears, not doing well. It needs some TLC, that's for sure. That population, if we're going to recover it, is definitely going to need some management action, and it's not doing that well. I know most people, a lot of people anyway, I don't know where everyone is, but are interested in the Sea to Sky area. And I've been working there as well with Steve Rochetta, and he would give a much better idea of what's going on because that's his study. I just catch the bears for him and help him out with the DNA and stuff whenever I can. But he's got an amazing memory for where every single bear seems to be. And we have ID'd over 500 bears in the South Coast Range from where Michelle works south, and he knows where most of them are. But generally, the Squamish, Lillooet, like west of Highway 99 through Whistler, the population is generally expanding. There's some great bear habitat in the Ryan River and the Upper Meager and Manatee and into the Upper Squamish, Elaho, Ashlew even. There's some really good bear habitat, and the bears are doing quite well. They've been increasing down through the Callahan and into the Brandywine. There's quite a few bears that they move throughout all that area. I mean, but they're doing well. When you cross into the east side of the highway, they're not. That's what we call the Garibaldi Pit. There are some bears in there, but not many, and they're also doing poorly. We don't know much about them other than doesn't seem to be too many. Yeah. Getting down to the very south of the North Cascades near Manning Park, we had one bear there that we think from his genetics moved in from actually across from the other side from the Columbia Mountains, crossed through the Okanagan somehow. But I'm not overly convinced there's really any bears, any females anyway, in that whole ecosystem. There has been not much positive sign for many years.
And Bruce, I'll just jump in because there was a lot of really good questions submitted when people were registering about the individual populations, numbers, and so on. And so we have put together a list of resources, which Jolene will speak to at the end. So if people are wondering if we're going to get into this in more detail, we're keeping this pretty big picture, but there are going to be some resources that will allow you to do the research on more of the local area.
Well, the problem with looking at local areas is bears live over big areas. I mean, female bears are somewhat more restricted, but they're still usually 200 to 300 square kilometers. Males are much larger. So if you talk about the Stein-Nahatlatch, well, one male will live in the entire thing. So it's not like you can talk about the the Texas Creek or Nahatlatch or something, because the bears will move in and out all over it. Same with, I know people might say, well, how are the bears doing in the upper reaches of the Ashlew? Well, they're coming in and out all over that area. So it's very difficult to isolate one small, those are very small drainages from a grizzly bear's point of view.
And Bruce, I'm part of my job is watching the time. So I'm going to give you just a few minutes to speak to the look ahead, which we talked about, which was looking at what's happened on the landscape in the past, what is predicted for grizzlies in the context of climate change? That's a question that comes up a lot.
Yep. Oh, absolutely. It is a question that we've had quite a few, as bear biologists, we've had quite a few meetings and discussions on it, particularly to do with the Rockies. I met with the Yellowstone people and Albertans and Montanans and Proctor and us. We've had several meetings, and it's a very challenging question for many reasons, and particularly over a bigger area. For one, British Columbia is very ecologically complex. We go from rainforests on the west coast to almost deserts in the interior, to rainforests to dry dip mountains. It's ecologically incredibly complex, and to know what's going to happen with climate in all of these areas varies. It's not like everywhere is going to warm up 2 degrees. So and how that what they call these climate envelopes will actually affect the ecology is very difficult. For example, in the Flathead where I've worked, the Southern Rockies where I worked for many years, the climate predictions are for about 60 years from now to be a little bit warmer and more precipitation, and it will fill sort of what they call the climate envelope of South Selkirk's now, like the Selkirk Mountains. There'll be more of a cedar hemlock sort of ecosystem. Well, it's not going to become a cedar hemlock ecosystem in 80 years because there's no cedar trees there and there's no hemlock trees and there's no, there's no dozens of other species. It's going to take a long, long time to shift. So there's complexity that it's very difficult to answer. But some things that in general will be good and some things will be bad. And the good will be fire. I mean, there's most, I'm not a climate guy, I don't know anything about it, but I listen to them. And they say that, there should be more wildfires. And wildfire is good for grizzly bears. Grizzly bears love fruit and, huckleberries and buffalo berries and, Saskatoon berries. They all do well in open areas. I grow grapes. You grow them in the open, grow them in the forest. So fruit will probably increase. Other things will not do well. White bark pine will not do well. It's not doing well now. There's blisters, not believe them. Both of those seem to be affected a bit by warmer climates. The one that's obviously probably going to do poorly is salmon. I mean, I'm no salmon guy, but I have a lot of Alaskan commercial salmon fishermen friends, and they're not over optimistic about the future of salmon. So perhaps the coast will have a great decline in salmon. On the other hand, it might have a lot of fires, so it might turn into a more of a berry ecosystem for bears than the salmon one it is now. But one thing that people don't appreciate as much as I think is going to happen, and largely it's because I work with Americans. When I bring it up, they don't like it, and it's climate refugees. I mean, I'm just guessing because I'm not a climate guy, but what's going to happen to Texans and people from Oklahoma and whatnot when it gets warmer and they can't afford air conditioning and stuff? I mean, what's going to happen if we have a whole bunch of people moving up here? And, some of them have more guns than we do and all the rest of the things. I mean, that could be I think a major issue in the future if we do actually have climate refugees and more people want to live in British Columbia than Texas and Florida and I don't know whatever else is working.
And I guess we've got a section on the kind of intersection between people and bears that we'll get into in a bit. So maybe Lana, thanks Bruce. Lana, can I turn this next one over to you? We're putting us into a little bit of context now, and obviously we're into spring and the bears have been emerging from their dens, and really one of the questions that seemed to come up a lot was around whether bears are, what bears are doing when they're in their dens. Is it a true hibernation? So maybe I can get you to speak to that for a few minutes. Oh, let's just unmute you here. There we go.
Okay, yay. Hibernation, yes, it's great. So bears hibernate to conserve energy. Hibernation is a function of food availability. So let's talk bears. We have 8 bear species that live on 4 continents. Not all of those bear species are going to hibernate. Did you know that? There's a little fact for you. So if we go to South America, you have the Andean bear, the spectacled bear. It's not going to hibernate. And why is that? Because it lives in a tropical environment and the foods are available. Okay, so we can even go over to our Southeast Asia, and we can look at the sun bear and the sloth bear over there, and they go up in trees and these tree nests, but they don't actually hibernate because it's a function of food availability. What happens here in British Columbia is we get these cold winters in the snow, and there's no food available for the bears, or limited food available, and it makes more sense for them to conserve their energy by going into a den site and hibernating. When they hibernate, they don't eat, urinate, or defecate. So that is an amazing physiological process. If we were to do that, we would develop osteoporosis, our bones would get weak, they would break, okay? So bears are studied a lot for that because it's a real phenomenon. They actually deposit a layer of calcium on their bones each hibernation. And as researchers, we can take advantage of that because when we capture them, we can pull a little tooth behind their canine, and called a premolar. It's just very small. Send it to a lab. They can slice that open, and like a tree ring, they can read the each year where it hibernates and it deposits that calcium and give us an age on those animals. Very, very useful for us. Okay, so it's an amazing physiology that the bears have. Also, when they den, females are going to make a decision. Bears have delayed implantation and induced ovulation. Okay, so the egg and sperm are going to meet, it's going to free float around, so it's not actually going to implant on the uterine wall like we do, and 9 months later we have a baby. They're going to go in their den site and they're going to den for a while, and then they're going to ask themselves, do I have enough fat to sustain myself? The answer is yes. One little cub's going to implant. Do I have enough for two? Yes. Two's going to, so where food becomes so important, right? Because the fatter the bears are, the more those females are going to have, right? But that whole process happens in hibernation. Well, they're not eating, urinating or defecating. That whole growth, the gestation now happens. And then you have these little teeny cubs. So I pulled lots of black bear cubs out. I've never done it with grizzly bear cubs. I don't recommend it for anybody, but this is done for research. But when they're born, they're tiny, little hairless, kind of like rats. I hate to say it, but they grow very quickly on that milk. It's so rich and it's so full of nutrition for them, right? So she's got to put that out while she's doing it. So the fatter she can go in that den, the better. Now, you asked about hibernation versus, are they true hibernators, right? Okay. We say bears are not true hibernators. Why? Let's say we go dig up a ground squirrel. We're going to take a look at that ground squirrel and we're going to think, oh my God, it's dead, right? Its beats per minute of its heart are like 3 in a whole minute, right? Its metabolism is at next to 0. It's not burning any fat. It's doing like this. Bears aren't like that. They barely drop their heart rate, right? They barely drop their temperature. And why? Because they're going through these processes of gestation, these different things. And also, their dens, we can talk about den structure if we have time. They usually just have the one opening for security reasons, okay? But they need to be able to rouse quickly. That ground squirrel is not rousing quickly, right? So but that bear may be able to rouse quickly. So those processes, although they decline, they're not to that point of where it's really, really, really low, right? So then we say our bears true hibernators. But when we look at what our physiologists tell us, yes, they are. And why? Because they do drop their metabolic rate. Okay, so that's really important, and that's what they decided. And so yes, bears are hibernators, but they are not true hibernators. I don't know, Claire, how much time do I have left? Because I can talk about bears and hibernation forever.
That was perfect. And then we had some questions that we kind of linked with this, being thinking about what females are doing in hibernation. And so we had a question around whether a female can carry offspring from different males at the same time. We thought this was an interesting question, and we're going to throw this to Michael. I can unmute you here. There you go.
Well, there we go. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming tonight. Just sort of a little easier answer. Yes, they can carry offspring from different males. Males have large home ranges, and they usually overlap several female home ranges, and they, try to mate with as many females as they can. And females, of course, have a bunch of varying suitors after them, so they mate with multiple females, multiple males. I describe it in a lot of times as like the universities in the 1960s when everybody was sort of mating with everybody else. And interestingly, there's not everybody scores even though they mate. So there's a skewed fitness success, or so some males have many of the population's offspring, and some males have very few to none. And at least in my studies, I've actually looked at the reproductive success of females, and it's a little bit the same. Some of the females are dominating with the surviving offspring. They all have the same amount of offspring, but so they have both sexes have a skewed success ratio. But and a lot of you people probably not old enough to remember the university in the 60s, but Bruce and I are. At any rate, that's my answer. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. And then the next one, we thought we'd throw this out to the audience. So we're going to throw a poll to you to see whether you think that grizzly bears and black bears can mate and produce offspring. So you should see a poll in front of you. Let's get your votes, and then we'll check in, and we'll throw this to Michelle to tell us if we get it right or wrong. So give you 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to close it now. Okay, so Michelle, we had 25% saying yes, 59% saying no, and then a solid 15%, 16% maybes.
Well, I would probably say that you're all kind of right. Apparently, in some zoos in London about 100 years ago, they successfully got black bears and European brown bears, which are grizzly bears, but in Europe, to reproduce, and the offspring they produced survived and later reproduced back with brown bears again. So it is possible. Some people have said that this has maybe happened in the wild, but over the thousands of bears now that we've captured using DNA mark recapture all over North America, it doesn't seem to happen that often, if ever, in the wild. So no, but grizzly bears have also reproduced with other species in zoos. So they often do with polar bears, or maybe not often, but it's much more common and much more recent with polar bears.
Okay. And then another question that came up a lot that we thought we'd have some fun with, another audience poll, is how long do grizzly bears live on average in the wild? So for the audience, how long do you think grizzly bears live for in the wild? So poll should be in front of you there. Michelle, we're going to get you to do this one as well, please.
You want me to do it?
Well, do the answer. Tell us the answer.
Oh, okay. I'm not allowed, it says.
You guys know the answers. We can't let you. Okay, so we're going to close this one now, and I will share the results. And so we've got 32% thinking 10 to 20 years, over half of the people on the call saying 20 to 30 years, and then 13% for 30 to 40 years, and then 2% 40 plus. So bears in average age of bears in the wild.
Wow. Well, you kind of got me, because the question that I got was how long do bears live in the wild?
Oh,
and
there you
how
go.
long do they live on average in the wild? So it's kind of different in a way, because if bears make it to their first or second year, which many of them don't. So the survival rate of cubs is anywhere from 30% to about 85%, depending on the population. And if they survive those first few years, the oldest bears that were grizzly bears were, I think, 37 in the Yukon, and there was one in the Flathead, you're saying, Bruce, which was shot at 32 years old, and there's been thousands and thousands in the DNA, or in the database, of where bears that have been hunted or killed for other reasons, and I think the oldest one in there was 36 years old. So, but anywhere from 25 to 30 to 40 is probably the max age.
Okay. So our audience is pretty tuned in on that one.
Yeah, they did well.
Okay, so thank you guys. We're going to jump into the next kind of section that questions kind of naturally fell into, were around grizzly bear behavior. We all know that grizzly bears are these highly intelligent, and because they're quite an iconic species, quite often their antics make it into our hearts and sometimes the headlines. So there's lots of people who are fascinated by the behaviors, and especially those of us who get to live in bear country. So let's fly through some of these. So first one, I'm going to fire over to Lana. Lana, can you tell us why bears rub on trees? And for people, if they're watching this video is going to play in the background, but you're not missing anything if you're not seeing any sound. Or if you're not hearing any sound, because we haven't got the sound on it. We're going to listen to Lana instead.
Okay, yay. Why do bears like to scratch themselves on trees? I'm not a bear, nor do I know anybody else. So guess what? We are going to guess. And it is most often believed to be a method of communication between bears. Why do we think that? When they scratch themselves on trees, they usually do other behaviors as well. You'll see some of these males might be doing it in my videos, but usually they urinate and the urine runs down their legs. And marked trees are often associated with marked trails. We know that bears have scent glands in their feet. And when they come up to trees, sometimes they'll mark a nice trail. We sometimes call it cowboying. Well, they'll step in the same place year after year, generation after generation, and they'll twist those feet, getting those scent pads to activate, and the males will urinate down their legs at the same time, getting that in there. When they go to these trees, what we think is when they leave all these scents, okay, it's a method of communication. Other bears can come up and make decisions. Sometimes, and a lot of times, bears don't even actually mark the tree. They'll sit there at the base of it, and they'll just smell up and down, absorbing that sensory information. You can kind of, you almost hear them thinking as they're doing it. So it may help them. Grizzly bears, they may have, a large male may have been there, and a mom comes along with cubs of the year, cubs, and she smells what's going on, and she says, you know what, I'm not going that way. And she just turns around and goes the other way. So she's avoiding confrontations, or a younger male may avoid a confrontation with a larger male. Okay, so it may help males, bears avoid each other, may help them actually find mates. Okay, do we see this behavior being really density dependent? That's some really good research that was published by Clayton Lamb recently about the density dependentness of marking structures, trees, and marked trails. Okay, so it may help bears in breeding season connect with each other, find each other, and find mates. Okay, and in the end, you know, I'm sure it really just feels good, because sometimes they just look like they're having a really good time getting rid of that winter coat. You see marking behavior also more in certain seasons, the breeding season and the spring, okay? And they leave big clumps of hair on the trees. So sometimes it looks like it just feels really good. So I think there we go. Why grizzly bears mark trees. Anybody else want to contribute to that on the panel?
No, I think no. I'm not seeing hands, so I think you nailed it, Lana. Another one that came up, you know, thinking about finding maybe bear hair in unusual areas and bears in the headlines. One of the questions that came up a couple of times was around why bears are heading over to Vancouver Island and swimming over to the island. Did you have any thoughts on that, Lana?
No, I have thoughts on everything to do with bears, but yeah, okay. So let's look at that one. Why are bears swimming over to the island? What amazes me every time I see this is like, really? I mean, bears have probably always swum over to Vancouver Island. Okay, a lot of these are young subadult males. So what happens is, to avoid this real inbreeding, the mother allows her female offspring to have part of her home range. So home ranges for females can kind of look like matriarchs stringing out. Males, no way. You get to an age, they get kicked out. You're out, and they'll hang around that area for a while, but then they'll be made to disperse, find their own area, find their own territory. And as Bruce mentioned earlier, males can have extremely large home ranges. We've had home ranges up to 5,000 kilometers square. Okay, so they're trying to have the maximum amount of females in their home range so they can breed maximally. Not every female is going to be receptive to breeding each year. She's not breeding when she has cubs on her, and grizzlies have their cubs for quite a long time. Right? So he wants to maximize that area. So of course they're swimming over to Vancouver Island. They're checking it out. What's here? What's in the territory, right? Now you gotta understand something. Vancouver Island's becoming a lot more developed, and habitat's being taken up. I think people are seeing the bears more than they were before. Just because 7 people report 7 call in does not mean there's 7 different bears. Could be one bear that 7 people are seeing, right? So I don't think that this is anything new. I don't think this is anything. You know, what's kind of more interesting question is, how come before us we don't think there was ever a resident population on Vancouver Island? So what that means is, we don't consider grizzly bears on Vancouver Island because we don't have a breeding population here. We don't have females having cubs here, right? So, but that doesn't mean that they don't come here and check it out and leave and hang out for a bit and eat. It took a lot to swim here. What are you gonna do? Go use all your energy and swim back? You have something to eat. So, you know, I don't find that question, I don't find, grizzly bears on Vancouver Island to be shocking at all. Okay. Anyone else?
I'm watching for hands. No, okay.
I could say that the research done on the ABC Islands, Admiralty, Chichagof, and Baranof, found that males will quite commonly cross up to 7 kilometers of water. That happens a lot. Females, they never get, all based on genetics, will never cross 2 kilometers of water. So we've probably had males going to Vancouver Island forever, but the females, it's more than 2K. They probably don't make it. And that's why the mitochondrial DNA, getting to something that's probably too common, of the ABC Islands is still got, it's a polar bear lineage, not a brown bear lineage, because females have not brought the mitochondrial DNA across from the mainland, but the males have brought the nuclear DNA across. So we have brown bears, but with mitochondrial DNA from polar bears, which I find real interesting.
And Bruce, stay leaned in here because this next question is for you. So we had a question around why are black bears, why are grizzly bears portrayed as more aggressive than black bears?
Well,
and are they really? Are they really?
Well, depends whose viewpoint. From a human viewpoint, when an encounter, yes, they definitely are more aggressive if they perceive someone or some other animal as a threat. But in general, bears would love to go through life without perceiving anything as a threat. They try to avoid confrontations as much as they can. But if they'd rather not, they'd love to be able to kill a moose and have no other animal show up to take it away from them. They'd love to never have an encounter with a pack of wolves or a cougar or a nasty bear that wants to hurt a female's cubs or something. So, but when those things do happen, brown bears have a very different response. Grizzly bears, and the theory behind it is that black bears have evolved and are still very closely associated with trees, with forests, and their escape terrain is trees. Cubs, you got the picture there. Little cubs go up a tree right away. Even adults go up trees quite often to avoid danger, particularly danger of say a pack of wolves. Whereas grizzly bears evolved mostly in treeless areas, and their defense is an aggressive show, and sometimes some contact, but usually it's a show. Often to communicate to whatever animal they're feel threatened by, that if you want, you're going to get hurt. Best to leave me alone, kind of thing. And so when a human gets into some kind of a encounter with a bear, and the bear perceives it as a threat, the grizzly bears will put on quite a show, and sometimes they will, actually make contact, but quite often they won't, and it's an incredible performance of threat, and you'll never forget it. Whereas a black bear, even if they do, they haven't got the act down nearly as well. But I'd like to also say that what bears perceive as a threat seems to change among individuals enormously, and even among areas. I kind of believe that bears that develop social graces, like ones that fish on salmon streams in concentrations, are often shoulder to shoulder. I mean, I've seen 58 grizzly bears in the size of a football field, and they're shoulder to shoulder, and they spend a few months that way. They tolerate other bears at distances, and they'll tolerate people like that. Whereas interior bears do not. They almost are never that close to the bears. If they are, as Lana says, it's usually a relative, a daughter that they might be 15 years old, but still a daughter with her cubs, and they might get closer. But they just don't have the social graces, so they can get excited at what seems to be a bit further away. And then, of course, I'm also a believer that some of the real frightening encounters people have, and fatal encounters, may be precipitated because the bear is wound up by something else. It may have just dealt with a pack of wolves or an adult male or something, and they're revved right up, and the poor person hiking along is who's had a bad day. So anyway, yeah, grizzly bears are, in an encounter like that, can seem way more aggressive. They have a pretty good show. You hope you never see it. Yeah,
and that's a great segue into our next section here. So we're going to jump into how do we avoid instances of human-bear conflict. And we thought we'd do our last audience poll here, and we're going to ask people what they do when they are out in bear country to try to avoid a conflict. So you should just see a poll pop up in front of you here. And so we've got the options of adventuring in groups, making noise, carrying bear spray, keeping your dogs on a leash, and avoiding areas with bear signs and activity. So just give us a few more seconds here. Okay, we're ending it there, and we'll share these results. So we got a good spread here across all of these, because of course this is a bit of a cheat question, because the answer is you should be doing all of the above. But one thing that comes up a lot and gets a lot of questions is around the precautions and the actions to stay safe in bear country, whether that's just because that's somewhere that you live, or whether you're out there recreating or working in bear country. And the safest approach is always to take steps to avoid encounters, never surprising a bear, and taking on these actions with keeping dogs on a leash, etc. But a really common question, and Michael, I'm going to put this your way, is we talk a lot about bear spray and the importance of carrying bear spray and knowing how to use it, but from the research, how effective is bear spray in real terms?
Very effective. There's quite a bit of evidence that suggests if you carry bear spray, humans and bears do much better. Probably the biggest concern about bear spray is having bear spray really handy. It's not only is bear spray effective and everything, but it's actually somewhere where you can use it in a quick time scale. So if you run into a surprise bear and he attacks, you really have to be ready. So if it's in your pack, it's not really very good. And if it's even somewhere else, so have it really nice and ready. It's effective. I think there's a lot of stories. We hear a lot of the encounters from the COs and all that where people are really saved from attacks, but sometimes I recommend if you're really nervous, you carry 2 bear sprays. I heard several stories where a bear has rushed in and attacked a person, and he's repelled it with a bear spray, and then it runs away 50 meters and it turns around and comes back. So you don't want to shoot it all in your first dose, or keep a little for a spare dose. I think that's an important thing to remember.
Yeah, and in the resources, when we send information out after this webinar, we are going to send you all and everybody who registered resources, and there is a really great video on using bear spray that Jolene's included in those as well. So
yeah, and I think the important thing to remember, people often think that they're safer with a gun because it kills the bear, and in maybe some circumstances you are, but most bear attacks or encounters, like Bruce was explaining, a show of aggression, are really sort of bluff to get you to leave. And if you have a gun, you may be shooting at the bear way too early when it wasn't ever necessary. And then you maybe possibly wound that bear, and then you get hurt because you wound a bear and it's pretty mad. And so the whole thing spirals out of control. So the mechanism of bear spray is it forces you to not do anything until the bear is much closer, and often it's a fake charge, and you end up safe, and the bear ends up safe. So it's a nice thing. One thing I wanted to add about your poll there, probably one of the things I don't see people do a lot, and we teach a lot in our bear safety courses, is to really learn bear habitat and bear signs, so you're actually smarter in the woods. The sidebar to that is it's a lot more fun when you're out there to know what kind of habitats you're in. If you're really in great bear habitat, then okay, we better pay attention here. We're in a huckleberry patch, which is obvious, but some other places, riparian areas and avalanche chutes. So if you learn a little bit more about the ecology of bears, you'll have more fun out there, but then you'll be a little smarter, and you can avoid those signs. So.
Yeah, and Lana, you did a fair bit of work looking here in the area that I'm in Whistler around the recreation, some of the specific recreation impacts of bears, and what Mike was just talking around you know, knowing the habitats and being able to recognize the risk factors around where you're recreating. So can you maybe tell us a little bit about how recreation activities impact grizzly bears?
Sure. So how do recreational activities impact grizzly bears? First off, let's say that not all recreation is equal, and not all recreation is going to be equal in its impact on bears. Okay? If someone's out hiking and has their dog on a leash and is taking precautions, there's no reason why grizzly bears and humans can't coexist and get along when we are knowledgeable, as Michael was talking about, in bear country, and we respect the fact that we have now entered the bear's home. Okay, so not all recreation is taken equally. But let's talk about some different things. So, you know, mountain biking is what you're talking about there that I worked on in Whistler. And so one of the things with mountain biking is, and the study they did, a mountain biker going uphill has no greater chance of having a negative encounter with a grizzly bear than a hiker. Okay, and why is this? Because it slows them much down, and they're going much more slower, and they're looking ahead, and they're doing these things. Now, when you're on the top of that hill and you're coming down in a mountain biking situation, you need to concentrate on that track, because you're zooming in and out, you're going fast, you are not making that noise, you're not looking around at what's going on around you in the bigger picture. That's what bears need. They need you to be paying attention, making noise. They'll, you know, majority of the time, they'll move out of your way and avoid conflicts with you if you give them the opportunity to do that, okay? So when we talk about these things, those things, now that we can talk about motorized access, okay? Now you're getting even to another level of impact on bears. Then let's talk about what's really going on, heli access, okay? Michelle told me the other day about heli yoga and heli golf. I had no idea. People do heli yoga and heli golf. I mean, you gotta be kidding. I'm taking a machine up the side of a mountain. I'm watching it going right up the side of the mountain. Mountain goats are jumping off. Everything's going crazy, right? So when we talk about the recreational impacts on these ones, you've got three main issues. You have excess energy output. So that animal is going to take off. Okay, now it's excess energy output. It's losing things. It can't just go to a superstore. It's finally put that fat on, and now it's being chased and harassed, right? It can be displaced. So if it's too much, it can actually be like, I'm not going to be here, man. There's just way too many people. It's in prime habitat. You know, I'm going to move, go to a lower quality habitat, right, to avoid people. So now it's not where it could be, right? And the third one is increased mortality risk. Okay, so you have an increased risk of mortality. When there's a negative encounter, it's not usually the bear who's given the benefit of the doubt. Okay, sometimes it is, and that's great, but a lot of times it's not. So we can have increased mortality risk. So these are resulting from these recreational impacts on bears. But like Mike said, there's ways we can, and like your poll indicates, there's ways we can reduce this. Proper trail planning. Okay, so get your habitat suitability maps, use all the data you got on grizzly bears, you know, find that high quality habitat and avoid it. Avoid it with trails in the first place, right? Some of those trails are already in existence, and that's really difficult to do. So those kind of things. So you might want to move trails if you're having a lot of conflict. Close them, give the bear the benefit of the doubt if something's in there. Have seasonal closures. So if it's really good habitat in huckleberry season and your trail goes through there, then guess what? Humans aren't, right? So give the bear that thing. So there's things that we can do to avoid that stress, avoid that energy expenditure that's going on, and avoid that potential for displacement and avoid mortality of grizzly bears overall. I don't know. You want me to answer more?
Does anybody have anything else they want to add on that, or Michelle?
The other recreational piece is our hunters, and their impact is different because they're one of the only recreators that travel with rifles, and when they have negative encounter, it often results in the bear being shot. So in that case, it's also difficult for them to make noise because they're trying to find an animal. So maybe if hunters also carry bear spray as well as just a rifle, that might reduce the potential for conflicts. And also when they're not hunting, or once they've got an animal, to make a lot more noise at that point to not run into them after the fact.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And one of the other things that gets talked about with the hunting side of things is the storage of kill animals that they've killed, but you know, there is the conversation around bears that are, you know, anything that is out there and smells good acts as a bear attractant, and you know, bears follow the nose. So with the
dead meat in their campsite, they have to protect it as they would garbage or anything else. Like, so you have to hang your meat really high, electric fences, and make sure that you're preventing any bear from coming in there, from preventing bears from getting access to that meat, and also not leaving a gut pile, keeping a clean camp, being responsible for what you've got.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And maybe on that food link, Lana, can we go into the question for you around the difference between a food conditioned bear and a habituated bear?
Yeah, so first I really want to thank you for this question. I'm so happy you asked it. It is a huge pet peeve of mine. Okay, so food conditioning and habituation to humans are two completely separate behaviors. Okay, so their roots are actually grounded in psychology. Food conditioning is operant conditioning. It's what you learned about when you had Pavlov's dog, and you can teach the dog to ring a bell and it salivates and gets a reward, right? Okay, so it's a reward-based system. So what the bear is doing is it's doing a behavior or an action, right? Say it's getting your garbage that you left out, it's getting to that can, and the reward is all the food of that garbage, okay? So now it's been rewarded. And that behavior is, and bears are very smart. Don't forget, like, you imagine if we just spent, you know, 3 or 4 years with our mom and then we were kicked out in the wild and had to survive, they learn extremely quickly. It takes very few instances for that learning to happen in that animal and for it to then become sort of a more habitual behavior. Okay, let's talk about habituation to humans now. Okay, habituation to humans has habituation should work on no reward, no punishment. So basically, it's a neutral stimulus. Okay, a neutral stimuli. So the bear comes in there, and so let's take bear viewing, an excellent example. Okay. So there should be absolutely no rewards anywhere in any properly run bear viewing operation. There are not any rewards anywhere. So the people are just there viewing the animal. So the bear sees the people, it's not getting a reward from them. It's not making an association between the humans and the food. It hasn't done any of that, right? But it's not getting negative punishment either. So it stops running away, right? It stops fleeing. It doesn't respond to that neutral stimuli anymore. We couldn't have bear viewing being done by the operations that are good on our coast if bears were also food conditioned, if these two behaviors weren't different and bears didn't look at them differently. Okay, now what's interesting about habituation too is that bears can have habituation, it can be area specific, so they can kind of know that, oh, in this area, you know, it's an area where I go into and I get all the salmon and all these, you know, stupid people watch me, right? You're not stupid people, but it's, you know, that's what the baby bear is going, all these people are watching me, right? And no reward or punishment, but somewhere else where it's not, I'm not expecting to encounter a person, I could encounter a person and then be like, whoa, right? Really expect that there and have that behavior and flee. The bear is food conditioned and habituated to humans. If those two behaviors come together, that can lead to real problems, because now the bear is not afraid of people and it associates people with rewards. Okay, so those can be our bears that usually we end up having to remove, because that behavior is just escalated to a point where it's very, very difficult to deter it now.
And with those, beautiful segue, Lana, into the next question, but with those, you know, we quite often hear about this idea of why don't we just relocate problem bears, and you know, it is a question that's asked a lot, and is tied so closely to the human bear conflict. So did you want to go into that a little bit?
Absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about that. So we can just pick up a bear and relocate it. We've relocated lots of bears, right? But what are we doing? We're relocating a problem. This is reactive management, right? So we can be proactive. We need to be proactive. We need to stop what's causing that problem before it occurs and before a bear becomes to a point where where relocation is something that's suggested as a management technique. Okay, what are you doing when you relocate a bear? You're taking it, you're putting it into another area. Well, there's not a lot of just pristine habitat you're going to plunk that bear into, you know, there's probably already another bear there. So what's the impact on that other bear? What are the impact on those people that you've just moved that animal into? You know, do they have attractants? Is it just going to cause a problem in another area? So you're just moving that problem, right? It's like a catch-22. And if you don't clean up what's going on, another bear is just going to come into the original area and your problem starts all over again. So relocation is not a solution. Relocation is reacting to a problem that's occurring. We can prevent that problem. We can easily prevent it. Keep your garbage secure at all times in bear season, right? Pick your fruit before it's falling from those trees. You know, consider using electric fencing, or use electric fencing for your bear attractants like chicken coops or those kind of things. So there's so many solutions we can implement if we do it properly. We're creating the problem bears. Problem bears are not born. They're made out of human ignorance. Okay? So we need to stop that problem in the first place rather than reacting to the problem. Might make you feel good to move that bear, but it's not the solution. I think Mike Proctor might have more to add on that too.
Yeah, I would add just a little bit. She's right. If you don't, you just can't move your problem away and expect things to go away. But we do use relocation a lot as a sort of a temporary management tool. I've been working with the COs for many years, trying to we're trying to teach the people not to attract bears. We're trying to teach the COs how not to kill bears, and we're trying to teach the bears how to avoid the people in the first place. So really what we do is go in and really try to clean up those attractants and clean up the attractant in the neighborhood. If a bear gets brought into one house and you clean up the attractants, but the neighbor has got a lot, it doesn't do him any good. So it's kind of complicated. But we often move a bear, we relocate it, but this is an important point, within the home range of the bear. So that's not really something terribly unfamiliar. You're not putting them into another ecosystem. You're not competing with you're just teaching that bear to, you know, stay away from the humans after we've done some fun things to it to discourage it from coming back. But in general, we've had, if we selected bears that are what I call conflict light bears, we've had pretty good success with either relocating them, a kilometer or up to 10 kilometers within their home range. We've had some pretty good success rate, upwards of 50%, keeping bears alive. And some bears are too far down what Lana called the food condition thing, and they're going to end up having to be removed and killed. But relocation is used within a home range as a temporary tool, and it's pretty effective. So it's nice to sort of separate these out. It's just not, the word relocation covers a lot of different options, but the long distance relocation we'll talk about in a later question is slightly useful, but not very useful, last resort.
Thanks, Michael. Anybody else got anything to add on this one? No? Okay. So Michael, we're going to stick with you for the next one around the popular question in BC, because we've got these big highways and there's been some successes touted from other mountain communities around wildlife overpasses. So the question that was coming up from audience members was, why can't more highway over or underpasses be built for wildlife? Yeah, and it's partially a good question, but partially misses the real point of the issue. And these highway overpasses are typically built to reverse fragmentation, so we can get connectivity across a valley. But really what our research has shown over many, many years is that fragmentation is mainly caused by people living along those highways and then luring them in with their attractants that we've just talked about with conflict. So we can build more overpasses. They're very expensive, and they're usually only done when you're rebuilding a highway anyway, so you have to wait 10 or 20 years for them to come along. But they're important, like the ones in the picture there are in Banff National Park, where they have very high vehicle per day rates of up to 15,000 vehicles per day. And bears still actually cross those highways at those levels, but they are useful, and it took a long time for bears to use them, but they eventually are using them. But like I say, the real problem is fixing or retraining the humans along those settled corridors to not attract bears and to get killed. That's really the bigger issue. So we can't just rely on
overpasses to solve our fragmentation problems. We need to sort of retrain the human population. The good news is it's not that hard to contain your attractants. We're looking at a problem that's plagued North American bears for 70 to 100 years. It's just not that big of a deal to clean up your garbage and secure it. I did it in my yard in about 2 days, and a little bit of electric fencing, and some places it's more complex than others, but what we're asking of the people to do to get along with wildlife is not that complicated if you put your mind to it. And so
we had a grizzly bear sighting actually in the community of Whistler here this spring, which is unusual, on one of the neighborhood streets, and it was really interesting having, you know, talked to people about how their barbecues for bears can basically be big popsicles that they want to go along and check out. People suddenly put the barbecues away a bit faster when we were talking grizzlies than blacks, but you know, that kind of, once you take care of the attractants, it benefits both species. So
that's a very good point, that the things we do for grizzly bear conservation are really helpful for black bears. Black bears are really not a conservation issue in British Columbia because they're plentiful and they have a quicker reproductive rate and they can sustain more mortality. But on the other hand, it's nice to get along with the wildlife we share in British Columbia, and you know, we can all learn from that. So also, black bears are good training for grizzly bears. People.
Yeah. Okay, so obviously, what you guys work on day to day, and is you know, and that has taught us so much about the things that we've been talking about today, comes from studies. So there were some really good questions around grizzly bear studies and how we know what we know. So we're going to kick off with a question for Bruce here. In that, why does a lot of the grizzly bear research focus so heavily on females and cubs? And again, I'm just going to start for the audience. I'm going to start a video here just for background. We're going to listen to Bruce, but so there's no sound. So don't panic if you're not hearing bear noises.
Should I talk?
Yeah, have at her, Bruce.
Just one quick comment on overpasses, and that I believe they only really work once you fence the highway, and the fencing is usually done to stop vehicle accidents with wildlife that costs ICBC, which is the insurance company of British Columbia, you know, millions of dollars a year, and costs human lives when they hit moose and things. So once you fence the highway, you know, you're saving a lot of money on those costs. And then you have to put overpasses in, or you fragmented the area. I don't think animals will cross an overpass if the highway's wide open. They'll just walk across the highway. Still, I was involved with that on the Coquihalla connector about in 1980 something with moose and deer in the winter when I was a grad student. Anyway, females, obviously, females have babies, males don't. So that's the main reason we concentrate on females. If you can keep females alive, they'll have their litters and raise their litters, and the population will do fine. I mean, males more or less just provide sperm. That's all males are good for. They don't do anything else. And they might do other things that maybe aren't good for the population. But why do we study females? Another one is that females usually have a litter every 3 or 4 years, so they only breed every 3 or 4 years. So it's not like we need a pile of males around really to inseminate the females. As long as we keep the female survival rates above about 92% in most areas, the population will be viable. I mean, that's about the tipping point for, you know, it varies with habitat quality and of course cub survival. And as Michelle had pointed out, cub survival is highly variable. It's generally quite low in populations near carrying capacity, like the very far northern unhunted populations like Denali. It's you know, cub mortality is very high. Katmai, cub mortality is very high. Kluane, cub mortality is really high. Northern Yukon, they're all less than half the cubs will make it. Whereas you get down further south, where human-caused mortality is higher, populations are a little below carrying capacity. Males have a much higher mortality rate down south than females do, and cub survival is quite a bit higher. Anyway, we like keeping females around because they're the ones that have the babies, and you got babies, you'll have bears. Any farmer will know that when he with his cattle. You need cows more than bulls.
And one of the things that and Michael, I'm going to put this one to you, but one of the things that comes up when, you know, looking at threatened population units and figuring out how to try to recover population units, one of the things that comes up quite frequently is, you know, we talked earlier about why the relocation of bears is challenging, but are there some instances where grizzlies in particular that you would translocate grizzlies out of their home range, for example, to recover a threatened population unit?
Yeah, it's been a pretty effective. It's a challenging but sometimes effective technique. Probably the best example in North America is just south of where I live here in the U.S. They've had a very small, basically almost eradicated or eliminated population in the Cabinet Mountains. And in the 90s, they went into Bruce's study area and took 4 bears and put them in the Cabinet Mountains. They were translocating, and these were 4 young females that were pre or close to their maturity age. They're not cubs or 2-year-olds, but I think 3 to 5-year-olds. And they moved them into the cabinets. And then they, one of them, they found out over like decades later when we got genetic testing involved, one of those females ended up basically saving the cabinet population. 3 of them never came to, one of them died right away, and a couple of them survived, but they didn't reproduce. So you have to first survive and then reproduce to be useful. This one female, right now in the cabinets, there's maybe 20 bears, 24 bears in this population, and like 22 of them came from this female. And there was 2 natural males, or, you know, resident males in that population, and she bred with both of them, and the rest of the population is built on them. So they've continued that program. To this day, they're still doing it, and they have a very slow, just a few bears a year, where they actually translocate them into the population. And it's mostly, like I said, young, premature females, but even now they're moving a few males in there just for the genetic variability. They've had very few males, and they're all related to those 2 original residents. So they're a little more challenging to keep in the population. Younger males are known for taking walkabouts when they're subadults. What we can't move around is older females who've established a home range. The older the bear, the harder that is. So it's been pretty effective. The thing to note about that, it's not an easy, simple solution that you can just, oh, let's move bears in there and fix things. They've moved almost up to 20 bears over the last 5 or 10 years into the cabinets, but only a few of them survive over the long haul to reproduce. So you have to have a very healthy population to move from a source population, because you're going to lose a few bears along the way. The good news is we have a lot of very healthy populations in British Columbia that can sustain that kind of helping of a neighbor population, if you will. Maybe not necessarily, they didn't agree to that, but so, you know, we have a decent situation where it could be considered. I think it used to be on the table for the North Cascades. It got the kibosh put on it for a variety of reasons, but it might come up in the future. And I know the States is considering translocating bears there. It might work. And so you have to take, when you embark on a program, you have to think about it pretty hard and realize and have a good source population. And then also the really important here, I think probably the most important thing, is to make sure that you solve the conservation pressures that were on that population that ran it extinct in the first place. If you might have had too many people in the backcountry killing bears or whatever it might be, you do need to solve those problems so the bears you put in there have the best chance of survival. That'd be the last point I'd want to say about that.
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks, Michael. Sorry. Michelle, I'm jumping over to you next for this next one around some of the data that we have for bears comes from the DNA studies that have been done. and a lot of those are sourced from the hair. So what data can you get from just a bear's hair? And then can you tell us a little bit about what you use that information for?
Okay, you can get lots of different types of information from bear hair, but more if you get it from the hair of many different bears, because then you can get population information. So the three most common things done with hair is to get individual ID, so you can identify which bear it is with its DNA. And then using the DNA, you get the individual, you get genetic sort of loci, which are different areas on that have different genes. And using those, you can get a pedigree or an information on how the bears in a population are related to one another. You can get how populations are related to one another. So population A and population B, how much mixing you get between those two populations. You can get the sex of individuals, so you can get sex ratios. You can get dispersal of some individuals that move into other populations if you capture them in different areas, or if populations are separate enough, they have sort of a distinct, let's say, pattern, for lack of a better word, in the different alleles you'll see for different genetic loci. And then other things you can get are isotopes, which are different nuclear, different numbers of neutrons in the nucleus of an atom. And because they exist, different ones exist in different patterns. So carbon will vary in different plants and differently. And then nitrogen will accumulate heavier atoms as they go up the trophic food chain. And so if you use different ratios of isotopes, you can get information on what the bears are eating, the proportion of their diet that comes from meat or that comes from plants, or even and that sort of thing. And then more recently, people have been looking at levels of hormones in hair, and it's not quite as accurate as, say, DNA. You can really get a good identification on an individual that's very accurate, whereas hormones, you can get maybe the sex, or not the sex, but the sex, but you get that from DNA. But you can also get how old it is, not how old it is exactly, but what age group it's in. So whether it's a juvenile or whether it's reached reproductive maturity it's about 70% accurate, I think. What else can you get from hair? Whew. Anybody else think of anything off the top of their heads? Alana?
I just want to say that the use of DNA through the roots of the bear hair has revolutionized our studying of grizzly bears in so many ways, and it's even allowed us to do non-invasive techniques. And it was invented by, or found out by, Bruce McClellan, who's on this panel, and John Woods, with input later from Proctor. And I just wanted to give accolades where they're due there. It's amazing what we can do with DNA from bear hair.
Yeah, that was Michael's first job, I think. We had him figuring out how to get the hair off the bears. But you can also get stress hormones a bit, cortisols and things like that. So, you can compare populations which have different levels of stress, I think, too. It's rarely done. We've done it with caribou, and it had mixed results.
And it'd be hard to tease out various stresses, you'd think.
Exactly.
One thing that we've done with hair recently is we've looked at the reproductive success of females in a population, just because we've sampled the whole population, so we know how many offspring are actually succeeding, and then we're able to go back and relate that to habitat and sort of have a fitness layer, like what habitats are related to producing successful offspring. That's been a really cool thing. The other aspect of DNA, this whole DNA revolution, that's really been neat for Bruce and I, because he started out in radiotelemetry and moved into genetics, and I started out in genetics and moved into radiotelemetry. But when you combine the two, you really start to see grizzly bear ecology and all this stuff in color. because with radio telemetry, you learn a lot about one bear and what it does, and sometimes a lot of bears because you get a lot of collars. But with DNA, we learn a lot about populations and whole different things. They really complement each other. So it's been a really, for my career, it's been a really great thing that I bumped into Bruce 25 years ago, and he had this idea. I just came along and did it, but it was really his idea. But it really has been cool to do both techniques and really start to see bears in color. And we're really starting to understand what's happening. It's been a satisfying time to be a bear biologist in that regard.
Thank you, guys. So I'm just watching the time. So I think we've got time for one more quick one. Michelle, we're going to finish with you talking about, so often there's the hair studies, but quite often you still might need to capture a bear for research. And so when a grizzly bear is locked out, we had a question around how long is a grizzly bear out when you capture them for studies?
You can, with some drugs, you can reverse them right away, but if you don't, they're usually out for about 2 hours. But often they'll wake up and then move and then go back to sleep for a while and kind of recuperate, I think. They sometimes can stay out for much longer and sort of transition into just sleeping. So for example, if we captured a bear and we went back to check on it either that evening or the following morning and it's still sleeping there, but as soon as you show up with the helicopter, it runs away. So it just went from being immobilized chemically to just sleeping. But usually if you catch it in a snare, it'll start waking up within an hour and a half sort of timing.
And an hour and a half is the same length of time as this webinar, and so we're sticking to it. So I think what's interesting with doing this virtual format is you can see how interested and engaged an audience is by watching the attendance numbers, and our attendance numbers have barely changed. So it's been really great to, everybody's obviously really interested, which is fantastic, and really wants to thank everybody for who's on the call for spending the evening with us. And I also really want to thank all of you, Bruce, Michael, Michelle, and Lana, for your time and your insights. It's been really fun to virtually moderate you and go through these lists of questions. I'm going to hand back over to Jolene, who's going to talk really briefly and just close us out here and flag some of the resources that we've all kind of collectively put together for people who want to get more information. So thank you, and back over to you, Jolene.
Okay, so yes, cannot thank all of you enough, all of our panelists, for sharing all of your expertise, but for everyone joining in. And so there was comments continuously going through the chat feed. And we only had 90 minutes. We couldn't get to all of them, but we are grateful for your input, for you submitting them. And this is being recorded, so once we get it kind of all finalized, you'll get that link and it will have the resources in the last. So I think there's a couple of more slides, and it has a few of the resources that we are hoping to share with you. I mean, there is a lot of information out there, but find credible resources. So some of the research Michael has been doing with Transborder Grizzly Bear Project, Southwest BC Grizzly Bear Project is Michelle McClellan's, and there's different organizations out there that are dedicated to bears, dedicated to preventing conflict with bears, and these are just some of them. Some of them, local communities have their own bear aware groups or various environmental organizations, so get in touch with them, find out what kind of programs they have, what kind of resources they have. But yeah, we really encourage everyone to do their research, get as informed as you can. And with things like this, if you did learn something interesting and new, share that knowledge with people, with your neighbors, with anybody who will listen to you. So it's, once we kind of are all on the same page, it's great to hear from the experts, but, with continued research and you do your homework, you can, become an expert too, and learn all of the things that you can to prevent conflicts, to, preserve grizzly bears, to preserve wildlife and habitats. Things like that. So yeah, there's websites, there's literature, there's videos you can watch, there's tons of information out there which just a little side sample here, but we will be providing more resources when we send out the link to this, this event that we put on. So again, thank you everyone for tuning in, to Claire for her wonderful moderating, for all of our panelists, and for support from the Grizzly Bear Foundation. Again, thank you very much. Thank you for participating to everyone, and we really do hope you enjoyed it. It was supposed to be fun, full of information, interactive, and it is a different time, but I think we were able to work through it. So yes, again, thank you very much, and I wish you all a great evening from wherever you're tuning into.